In the program, it says that Gregory Schmidt is the moderator of this panel. Unfortunately, we got a call this morning. He said he was sick. So we have Bruce Prittman, the founder and president of Profit Engineering Technologies, who is currently a contractor with NASA and the director of flight projects, as his replacement moderator. And I'm sure you've already seen him on stage. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome up to introduce the rest of the panel. Bruce Prittman.
Yeah, Greg sends his regrets. He really wanted to be here. This is a topic that's near and dear to his heart, but he did not sound good. Called the ISECG. You know, in aerospace we love these acronyms. The International Space Exploration Coordination Group. And it's a group of, I think it's 17 countries that get together and try to coordinate exploration strategies and how do we work together to explore space. And right now they've got an interesting process that they're doing, in that they have a dual path. So there's two kind of roadmaps that they've set up. One is that you go to the moon first and then you go to an asteroid, and then the other one is that you go to an asteroid first and then you go to the moon. So there's still a significant amount of controversy. There was recently a global exploration conference in Washington, and kind of like of the 17, it looked like a large majority of them, and I think Jim will talk to this, was really kind of focused on the moon for a number of reasons that we'll get into as part of this talk. And as you know, I don't think I have to explain to anybody in this room about the Google Lunar X Prize. But I'm sure Amanda's going to do that a little bit, is talk to us about that. And what we wanted to do here with this is not just do another, okay, here's what the Google Lunar X Prize is going to do and all that, but what we wanted to do was to focus on then what? So if somebody wins the Google Lunar X Prize, then what? You know, what does that enable? What kind of leverage does that give us? How could we leverage off of that capability to do things in the future? So we've put together what I think is a great group of folks here. So on the order that they're going to present, let me introduce Amanda Stiles is going to speak first, and she's the technical operations manager for the Google Lunar X Prize, and she's going to kind of lay the foundation for what we're going to do. Then we're going to have Jim Crisafulli. Jim is the director of the Office of Aerospace Development in the state of Hawaii, and there's some really exciting things going on in Hawaii as recently as last week. And are they still up there? They've left, but some stuff on Mauna Kea that
they resolved to leave.
They resolved to leave. Okay, that's a really bad pun, and he'll explain that to you. And then we've got Jonathan Hofsler from heads up the Far East business development for Space Exploration Technologies, affectionately known as SpaceX, is going to talk to us about kind of some of their thinking in this area. And then finally, Dennis Wingo is stuck in London, so he sends his regrets. He's not able to make it. You know, those darn transporters just aren't working the way that they're supposed to. And so I've asked Rex Ridenour here to step in for him. I've known Rex for like forever, you know, back when neither one of us had gray hair. I think we did the first one of these things, you know, like 33 years ago. We were kind of in the San Francisco area, you know, doing a conference like this in 1979 for the 10th anniversary of the first lunar landing. So that shows you how far we go back. You know, is that the new thing? Eyes Up, IZUP LLC is his new thing. You probably know him as Mr. Ecliptic, which he founded and ran until very recently, and now he's got his new thing, and so he's for hire. So, you know, great guy, a lot of experience, small sats, planetary missions. But the reason that I asked him to join this panel is he's had a really fascinating experience with a group about a decade ago called Blastoff, which I thought was very appropriate to what we're talking about here. So again, the idea here is what happens after the Google Lunar X Prize. So let's start off with Amanda, and then we'll go in order from there. So then I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So Amanda.
Okay, is this thing on? Okay, good. So thank you, Bruce. My name is Amanda. I've been with the X-PRIZE Foundation now for about 3 years, and I've really seen the landscape of Google Lunar X Prize change in just that short amount of time. It's been really interesting. I think when I started, there was less than 20 teams, and a lot of them were just kind of still working on rovers that were on paper and mission concepts. And now we're seeing rovers that are in their third and fourth rover prototypes, and they're testing out at lunar analog sites that Jim will talk to you more about. And we're actually seeing a lot of teams negotiating and signing launch contracts, and not a lot of them have been announced yet, but we'll actually have one of those announced in the next 2 weeks. So those financial barriers that everyone's very concerned about are actually starting to come down brick by brick, and we think this is really going to happen. We just had our team summit in May. We're at 25 teams right now, and I would say the largest topic of discussion was teams talking about working together to make this happen. So a lot of teams have either worked on a rover or a lander, or they're looking at ways to collaborate to make the launch costs come down. There's not a single person in this competition that doesn't want the prize to succeed. So if it's not the team alone by themselves, they want to work with other teams, or they want to support this emerging lunar economy in some other way. So it's very inspiring to see that, and it's going to be a success. I can guarantee that. We hope to see multiple teams going in the next 2 to 3 years, and we're very excited and optimistic about that. And the teams who maybe won't make it to the moon are contributing in other ways that are significant, whether that be education or creating some spin-off industry that will support this lunar economy in the future. So I guess that's all I really have to say, but I will talk more about details later on.
Great. Jim?
Thank you, Bruce, and aloha. I'll try that again. Aloha. Aloha. There you go. That's the way we generally start all conferences in Hawaii, and it's lasted for some time, since the inception of the state in 1959. And as you know, Hawaii has played an instrumental role in supporting space exploration since its inception as a state, beginning with a test bed for the Apollo astronauts that went to the moon, and since then working very extensively with NASA and the private sector and commercial satellite launches and remote sensing of the Earth. And most recently, we've been toying with a concept called the International Lunar Research Park. And we've had another giant leap, but this time with all mankind. And this concept's been under formulation for some time, the past couple of years. It began with a conference in Hawaii with the Japan-US Science, Technology, and Space Applications Program. And I see several people in the room here, Jim Caravala, and Dallas, and Charles Miller, and others that have been participating in this for some time. International association that was largely bilateral. It's now expanded into the Pacific International Space Alliance to talk about how we might share common visions with complementary resources and capabilities to help reduce the costs, enhance the benefits, and hopefully accelerate the timetables of future space missions. So they started talking about, well, what are we going to do to extend humankind's presence beyond low Earth orbit? We haven't been there in 40 years. What is the next logical step? Then we had an exploratory workshop at Ames Research Center in April of last year, in which we refined this concept. And then last November in Hawaii, we had a leaders summit talking about the various components of launching a program like an ILRP, what the steps might be, and how we could prototype and test technologies, validate these technologies to support that kind of an operation. What's emerged over the past several years it's not really a new framework for space enterprise, but it's a way of looking at this as a two-sided coin. The first half century, we've been going out into space largely exploration and research, the Apollo program, Hayabusa, Spirit and Opportunity on the surface of Mars. And I only list these 3 destinations. We've obviously gone elsewhere, but these are the 3 destinations that have been discussed most recently on the Hill and elsewhere. But the next 50 years, the other side of this space enterprise coin, has to focus largely on space development and utilization, being able to move out of the cosmos, use those resources on other worlds so we can develop what Congress, the President, and others have called for, sustainable settlements beyond low Earth orbit. So we're talking manned and robotic missions to Moon, and we don't make a distinction between should we send robots or should we send humans. It's a partnership, and they have to work together. Robots and humans to asteroids and eventually to Mars. The future of space exploration, a lot of discussion about going to asteroids, going to Mars, going to Moon, what should be the next step, but we think this is slightly the wrong way of looking at it. We prefer a vision which envisions the Earth-Moon system as the launch pad for humanity to the rest of the cosmos. Develop resources on both worlds, a 2-world system from which you would embark to asteroids, Mars, and beyond. So a launch pad from the Earth-Moon system. The rationale for lunar exploration and development, and it's obvious to, I know, many people in this room, faster and cheaper than deeper space missions, and of course, according to Pete Worden, this makes it better. Leverages existing technologies and capabilities that we already have developed from Apollo to the present day, minimizes risks and maximizes opportunities in science, education, commercial development in the near term, enables deep space observation from the Moon, testing and evaluation of new technologies, ISRU and others on the lunar surface, education and training, big time. Most universities have semester abroad programs for their juniors. We can envision a month or 2 abroad on the Moon for students. Very exciting. Commerce, we're talking mining the Moon, space tourism, and launch from the lunar surface. But again, looking at the Earth-Moon system, where it's preferable in terms of cost and technical feasibility to launch from the surface of the Earth, from low Earth orbit around the Earth, or from the Moon. Have those options ready for us. And finally, this aligns with international policies and priorities. This is vital for international collaboration. And as Bruce was mentioning earlier at the GLEX conference, a lot of discussion about, Moon versus asteroids, but the preponderance of thinking at the table. And I remember Vladimir Popovkin from Roscosmos up there saying very emphatically, we have no problem with, going to asteroids and Mars, great, but, it makes the most sense to go to the Moon and develop the capabilities to extend. And then he went on and basically provided the litany for what we envision for the International Lunar Research Park. The ILRP vision, a multinational R&D facility that would be developed through partnerships among private and public agencies and institutions to enable innovation in science, research, education, exploration, utilization, and commerce, big time, but also to facilitate eventually the development of the first sustainable human presence beyond low Earth orbit. And you look at the 2010 NASA Authorization Act, you look at the President's space policy, and it says over and over, sustainable settlements beyond LEO, the litany here, which the Moon can support. But this will be prototyped through terrestrial analogs in Hawaii and elsewhere and developed through, and this is where the Googles Lunar X Prize comes in, precursor robotic village on the lunar surface. And this is a way we envision the X Prize coming to a point of less competition and more collaboration, providing an enclosed system with various robots doing various things, but working together, perhaps with a central communications post that could be established with the help of NASA and the private sector to facilitate that interaction. There are basically 3 legs to this stool. Making this multinational in scope, again, to share resources so we can reduce the cost per nation and enhance the benefits and hopefully reduce the timetables. Public-private partnerships to leverage entrepreneurship big time. This is something that the Musks of this world and Bransons and so forth are doing so well. We need to tap into those resources and develop these partnerships between the government and the private sector. It's not either or, it's got to be partnerships. And finally, being massively participatory. And this is not only engaging governments and industry and universities, but also the private sector, because it's the folks in the trenches and also just Joe Q public out there that's ultimately going to make long-term programs sustainable. They vote in presidents and congresses, they outlive them, and if you're going to have any kind of a sustainable program for any length of time, you've got to get the public behind you. They've got to become major stakeholders from the get-go. This is sort of our build-out vision for the ILRP. a platform for space observation, looking at the sun, Earth, near-Earth objects, deep space, radio astronomy from the far side of the moon. It makes a lot of sense. Space utilization, development, and commerce, space tourism, mining the lunar surface, university K-12 education, I mentioned that earlier, a launch pad for certain deep space missions, capitalizing on the 16G from the moon. And in doing all of this, developing new technologies in energy and resource extraction and so forth that would have direct applications on the surface of the Earth and improve our quality of life on our planet. So we envision basically a three-phase build-out leading to a sustainable human presence on the moon, beginning with the terrestrial analog prototype in Hawaii, segueing to a lunar robotic village, and we've been talking with the Googles Lunar X Prize about becoming a preferred partner in supporting the development of technologies of these teams before they go to the moon, and finally transitioning to a research park on the lunar surface. This is an optimistic, but we still think viable timeline for this. We've started these discussions last year, how we would fund this, developing the concept, developing a terrestrial infrastructure, which I'll talk about in a minute, leading to beginning of the lunar infrastructure, the X Prize and other missions to the moon, toward the development of a robotic village that would be a precursor for the final return of humans to the moon. Now, we have a little fudge factor here. Somewhere between 2019 and 2022, that's the 50th anniversary of Neil's first and Gene's last walk on the lunar surface. But I know this looks optimistic to some of you in the room, but we still think it's feasible. But I'd love to hear feedback on that. So the enabler for this, or one of the enablers, is the Pacific International Space Center for Exploration Systems, or PICES. I know it sounds a bit fishy, but the concept's been around for a better part of 5 years. The goal here is to develop a world-class center of excellence facilitating multinational collaboration in R&D and education to promote and enable sustainable human settlements in space. But it's not just human, it's human and robotic. We had a breakthrough in the last legislative session in Hawaii. They appropriated $2.34 million to begin development of a research and development park under the auspices of PICES. This would provide an instrumentation and electronics lab, chemistry lab, machine shop, and control room for remote deployments and mission simulations at analog test sites on the Big Island. As you know, we have among the most lunar and Mars-like soils in Hawaii, especially in the Pohakaloa region between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. And PICES has leveraged these resources over the past almost 6 years now by developing field demonstrations or facilitating field demonstrations on the slopes of Mauna Kea. These are pictures of, this is the Scarab rover as developed by Carnegie Mellon Institute along with JPL, which developed the TWEELs on these rovers, and the University of Hawaii, sintering regolith to build structures out of the fine grains on the soils of Hawaii, but eventually on the lunar surface, extracting water and oxygen from the soils on Hawaii. It was great news for astronauts, and of course after L-Cross we know there's a lot of water on the moon, and this is another way to help develop these and extract these resources and utilize them. This is the test site on Mauna Kea, or one of the test sites. This is at the 9,000-foot level near Halepohaku. And in this shot you can see 4 nations. These are the 2010 tests, and we have Canada, Japan, Germany, and NASA represented in these test sites out there. Our goal is to maintain the integrity of the surface of Mauna Kea. So these are temporary test sites. After the tests are over, we take down all the tents and remove the equipment, and we go back periodically to continue the testing. Oh, and we just finished the testing for the Resolve future mission to the moon in the next 2 to 3 years, which is going to go to the South Pole and see if they can drill for water. But we had the Canadian Space Agency, NORCAT from Canada, and Johnson Space Center, Kennedy Space Center participating in those tests. They went very well. This is sort of our vision for the organizational structure that will lead eventually to the International Lunar Research Park. PICES is sort of at the helm of this with the analog test sites in Hawaii, but we also are involving the Pacific International Space Alliance, or PISA, formerly JustSat. PISA, of course, is the birthplace of Galileo in Italy, so that's why we sort of went with that acronym. And our Hawaii Office of Aerospace Development, which has established a Space Act agreement with NASA, which is we're working collaboratively now with Ames Research Center to develop analog test sites, which is basically what we see, not NASA yet, but we see as phase 1 of an International Lunar Research Park on the moon. and also partnering with other space agencies. We're talking with JAXA, Canadian Space Agency, ESA, and others, global aerospace corporations, and education and research centers. And what Charles Miller talked about yesterday, International Lunar Authority. I mean, eventually we're going to have something that helps guide development, intellectual property rights, ownership, all sorts of things which have to be considered as we reach out beyond low Earth orbit and establish sustainable settlements for humans beyond the Earth. So this is sort of what we're doing now in terms of concept development this year. We had this ILRP Leaders Summit in Hawaii last November. We've been briefing our legislature, which led to our $2.34 million grant. We participated at GLEX, as Bruce mentioned, and ISEC in Washington. We just conducted the field tests on Mauna Kea. We had a representative attending the NLSI forum, and of course I'm here with NewSpace. We are currently briefing Office of Science and Tech Policy and other legislative offices in Washington, D.C., and we'll be holding a Pisces conference in Hawaii, November 11 to 15, at the Waikoloa Hilton on the Big Island, Marriott Waikoloa. And we'd like to encourage any of you who might be interested to come join us on this, and we'll be sending out an email to all of you folks with more information on this. So that's about it in terms of summarizing our concept here, but to the future from Hawaii, mahalo nui loa. Aloha.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Jonathan Hoffler from SpaceX. You may see in the program that I was originally supposed to speak on the Mars 2030 panel this morning with Rick, and I think we'll all agree that it's much better just to sit and listen to Rick rant for a little bit. It's pretty exciting. So again, thank everyone for coming. One of the things I love about this conference is that it's on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Rick alluded to this this morning. And we firmly believe at SpaceX that you can't revolutionize this industry on a 9-to-5 job, a 40-hour work week, which neither exists at SpaceX. And I think that the fact that we're all here on a Saturday, giving up our Saturday, is a true testament to that. So truly thank you for giving up your time. As was mentioned in the introduction, my primary role at SpaceX, I head up the business development efforts for Middle East and Asia. But I also wear another hat. I'm in charge of any X-Prize efforts that we have in the liaison between the X-Prize office and SpaceX. Been working with many of the teams over the last several years, many of them baselining a Falcon 9. In some cases, used to be the Falcon 1. And my primary role is we're doing a lot of things at SpaceX as we make a lot of news. Championing the efforts for the X-Prize teams to get them the resources that they need internally and to make their plans feasible. And as Amanda alluded to earlier, that personally, regardless of who wins, I think it's important that somebody wins. It'd be great if they were on a Falcon rocket, but ultimately it's important that this competition continues and that somebody wins. Very impressed with the teams that I've seen. What's amazing about the competition is that some teams started early with a bang and fizzled out. Some teams came late. Some are small. Some are large. But overall, it's just impressive to see them, the efforts that they put in, the long hours that they put in. So I'm excited to see what comes in the next few months and the next few years. You guys met on Thursday. Adam Harris, our Vice President for Commercial Development, for Government Development, talked a little bit about our NASA work. We have, obviously, NASA's one of our favorite customers, but they're not our only customer. We definitely wouldn't be in the position that we are right now without the help of NASA, and that's important to note. But we also have, NASA makes up about a third of our business, about 2/3 are commercial. We have a manifest of over 40 missions, and again, 2/3 of those are commercial, and we hope to add some lunar missions to that manifest. Just a couple data points. Falcon 9 can take greater than 2,000 kilograms to translunar injection. Price of a Falcon 9 right now, as posted on our website, is between $54 and $59 million. We offer the Googles Lunar X Prize folks a 10% discount. And then also in the news, we've been talking about our reusability. And so we hope that once we've been able to prove out the reusability of the Falcon 9, that we can offer an even greater discount to all people looking to get to space. So they've asked us to keep our comments, early intros short, so we'll open it up to questions later, and thank you for your time.
So Rex?
Yeah, I'll just follow Amanda's lead and cool my heels. As Bruce mentioned, we first met at a conference very much like this one in San Francisco in 1979, and I actually started first hearing about fairly...
12.
Yeah, exactly. We had diapers on, didn't we? Yeah. But I'd been hearing about fairly audacious plans for the moon, especially privately or commercially, since '76 when I heard Gerard O'Neill speak when I had a summer internship at an aerospace company. And he's the space colonies guy. And back then the concepts were like 2 orders of magnitude wilder than you're hearing about today, with very audacious plans for the moon and whatnot, and visions for the moon. And ever since then, there's been a lot of this talk about going back to the moon privately or commercially, but in fact, there's only been one mission that got there commercially, and it was kind of by accident, and I happened to be involved with that, but it was a commercial communications satellite that got salvaged by going to the moon to shape its orbit that way. And a lot of people, I think especially in the general public, even in the commercial space business, they don't realize maybe that commercial space ends completely at geosynchronous orbit right now. There's nothing else going on out there, except for that strange exception that managed to get itself to the moon. All the rest has been talk, and what I'm really excited about, and it's almost as exciting as I've ever been in my career, and I've had a pretty good experience so far, is that we're finally at this threshold where I think something really is going to happen at the moon, especially commercially or privately or both, probably within the next few years, certainly by the end of this decade. And I think it's just about as important for perceptions as what happened to the perception of human space travel with winning the X Prize in 2004. And that sort of popped everybody's bubble about what they thought human space travel was about, and the whole world kind of got this idea that it's not just for government astronauts anymore. It's going to be different from now on. That'll get accelerated as Virgin Galactic starts launching people up there, and eventually human crews on Dragons. And I'm really excited about the idea of an end-to-end mission that involves a Bigelow module, a Dragon capsule. You can envision that. That's a completely commercial space station program. That's really wild, you know. And so when I was working at JPL for many years, 11 years to be exact, I got involved with several efforts related to the moon. These were all NASA-directed, you know, science missions to the moon. And yeah, that was a very slow process. Some missions eventually got approved and funded, not only from the U.S., but other agencies like JAXA and the Europeans. Even the Chinese and the Indians now have had missions to the moon, and Japanese. But that was all a very slow process, and while I was at JPL, some real funding came alive to possibly fund commercial missions. And I actually left the lab, even though it was a great place to work, specifically to start getting involved with those kinds of missions. And as Bruce mentioned, I was involved with this company called Blastoff Corporation, which was a completely stealth company at the time, and we made a lot of progress getting an end-to-end mission concept put together with a great team that was going to land a robotic rover on the moon. And about a third of the way into that year-long process, we hired Peter Diamandis to be our CEO. And that whole experience, even though it terminated because of the dot-com bubble popping and whatnot, because our funding source was from a dot-com billionaire, we made so much progress during that time that's what I hear from Peter, is that's what inspired Peter eventually to start the Googles Lunar X Prize, because we made so much progress. We had the rocket on order, we were making payments on it, we had an end-to-end system design that was peer-reviewed by a really tough review board, and they thought we could do it. We had all the flight hardware on order for the first 2 landers, and we had a great team put together. And so we were, I think when we got shut down right after the year 2000 ended, we were probably, we thought about somewhere between 15 and 18 months from launch. And one of my things I want to do now is, in my new role, is get permission from our funding source at the time, Bill Gross, to write that whole story up, because it's a great story, but it hasn't really been told because it was all stealth and kind of secret at the time. But what I'm really excited about now is that I think it's important for the whole perception of this market out there that the first mission to go back to the moon commercially be a success, commercially or privately. It could be a Google Lunar X Prize mission. It could be some other funding source. But I think if you can just do that, any mission to the moon that's specifically designed to go to the moon commercially and it succeeds, that'll be just like the Google Lunar X Prize or the Ansari X-PRIZE being one. And it'll change the whole tone of the debate. It'll take the snicker factor out. And it'll enable a bunch of stuff that we'll probably get into shortly. But I think it's going to happen, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Okay, thank you. So, some different perspectives on the moon and the Google Lunar X Prize and commercial space. I wanted to kind of ask the first question and leverage off what Rick and Bob were talking about this morning and some of the questions that came up, and that was this whole idea of markets. One of the things that I've had the privilege of getting to talk with quite a few of the Google Lunar X Prize teams and all that, and the one thing that seems to be common to all the teams, they've got very different approaches and everything from open source to and if you go to the Google Lunar X Prize website, they have pictures of kind of the concepts up there, and it's fascinating to look at all the different ways that people are looking, not to get to the moon necessarily, because there's certain physics you got to deal with, but once you get to the moon, how do you traverse that 500 meters? And just a fascinating array of different things, from rolling to hopping to slithering to like spiders and this whole thing. And I find that very exciting, because if you look at any kind of technology, new technology realm that opens up, there's usually a period right after the opening of the frontier, this new capability, where there's kind of massive experimentation. It happened in automobiles, it happened in airplanes, it happened in computers, that at some point you get this massive experimentation where people are trying new things in new ways, and eventually things start to coalesce. You see certain things work, certain things don't work, but you have some data to go on. Well, in space, we really haven't had that until now. And so we're a little bit delayed in this, and some people say that we don't do things the way that everybody else does, and there's probably some truth to that. But we're finally getting around to it, so I think this is a really exciting time. But the question comes, and one of the reasons why we held this panel is you can't make a business case, you can't close a business case by winning a prize, especially if it costs you more to win the prize than you're going to win with the prize. So where do you go from there? So I guess the question here is where do you guys see the markets? Where do you see the what's next emerging? Is it going to be in the entertainment and media kinds of things? Is it going to be in some kind of educational play? Where do you see this happening? Or is it going to be in some combination of all those? Or maybe you don't see it. Maybe you don't see that it's there. So if we could just, anybody want to kind of tackle that question?
Okay, I could start. It's an interesting question, and one that our teams have very diverse answers to, but I think from my perspective and from my experience in talking to these teams that it's going to be something of a combination. And I think one of the leading markets that I've seen so far is delivery of payloads to the lunar surface and services that the teams can provide to probably government agencies, particularly NASA coming on board as a customer, but there's other customers as well. That could be performing science. A lot of them have opened up payload space on board their craft so that they can perform science experiments. There's prospecting, there's scouting for future lunar bases. A lot of it also depends on what the exploration goals are that come out of the agencies, but I think that's probably one of the top markets the teams are looking at. For initial missions, a lot of teams are looking at media and entertainment and allowing people to drive the rover and things of that nature. how long that will last as a market, I'm not really sure. I think at least initially it's going to be very exciting. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for that. It may continue depending on what teams plan to do. But I think those are kind of the initial markets that the teams are focusing on from my perspective.
Yes, we've been receiving several calls and emails from a number of companies that have heard about what we're trying to do on the moon and with establishing a permanent presence. And it's interesting, I'm not at liberty to disclose two of the communications companies that contacted us, but they want to set up a base on the moon and do nightly broadcasts from the lunar surface. And a couple of producers have contacted us, and they want to do something like a sequel to Tom Hanks' From the Earth to the Moon, but rather than looking retrospectively, looking to the future and saying, where might we go from here? Of course, the moon without an atmosphere or standard atmosphere is a great place to do deep space astronomy from the far side. You can test and evaluate new technologies for ISRU and other applications which have relevance not only for space exploration but also on the Earth. But I think if you're looking for a let's hit it out of the park application or killer app is one of the questions that was being posed earlier. Baseball. You know, you're guaranteed to hit a home run most of the time. But seriously, the people have talked. Of course, you have to get people up there to participate in this. But overlooking that detail, there's a lot out there which people are just fascinated in. And initially, up front, the high-end rollers will be able to come in and participate, but eventually when we reach economies of scale and hopefully integrate the resources that the Googles Lunar X Prize and robotic teams have into a synergistic capability for communications, for energy recycling, and for resource processing, there are a lot of opportunities out there.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this for quite a while, having been involved with quite a few of these commercial efforts, and that's the big question is what's the market to sustain this? I think you can get started kind of on a stunt-based model where it's the first of this, first of that, kind of like what happened with barnstorming in the aircraft days, where you can get away with a few clever, cheeky, fun things to do, and the media will pay attention for a while, a week or two, and you can make, maybe close the business case for that model, but it's not sustainable. So then the way I kind of look at what might happen after you just get started and sort of get over the snicker factor that you can even do any of this is I kind of split it into whether your business is based on shipping bits back and forth, shipping passive payloads to the moon, possibly bringing passive payloads back, and then getting into active payloads like technology demonstrations and whatnot, and then eventually humans and biological payloads. And each one of those gets a little more difficult, but I think the most likely scenario for some sort of sustained market is collecting bits, either lunar resource and scientific kind of data, maybe storing data on the moon that's valuable, like there was one Japanese mission that surfaced when I was at JPL, going to be privately funded, and they wanted to put very important archival information on the surface of the moon as sort of a time capsule archive thing, which made a lot of sense. I think there's a ready market for a while for cremains, very high value, low mass payloads, and that was a pretty clear, still is a pretty clear payload you could put there. Once you get any kind of activity going to the moon on a regular basis that needs any kind of infrastructure, whether it be landing pads, power supplies, telecommunications, far side communications, whether that need for infrastructure is driven by government programs worldwide or whether it's a combination of government and commercial or private, there's a market for just setting up that infrastructure. If you're trying to precision land at the same place, you're going to need some sort of navigation system to always land there, and that's infrastructure. So there's a market there, but it really depends on frequency of launch and getting there. And eventually, long term, you're going to, if you have some reason to keep going back, then you can justify sending humans and making it all more efficient. But in the meantime, you're going to probably do it all robotically. But I think there's a very natural progression. But what frustrates me is we haven't gotten there first, just doing it once, doing whatever simple thing you can do. And I think a huge enabler for all of what I just talked about is the launch cost. If we can get the cost of the rockets down to some reasonable, low number, then you can experiment and try all kinds of great stuff. Right now, that's kind of holding everything back.
You're stealing my thunder. So exactly what Rex was saying, I think enabling services, SpaceX This is on, right?
Yeah.
SpaceX right now is providing services right now from the surface of the Earth to translunar injection. And what we're seeing, what a lot of the X-Prize teams are providing a service as part of their business plan from TLI to the surface of the moon. Some of them are performing test beds, some of them are doing drills, or I don't know what they're doing. But these are the services and the infrastructure that are going to enable what the killer apps are going to be. And the truth of the matter is we really don't know what the killer apps, I think even if we had the killer app answered right now, we might be trying to work on the business plan, but it might be too early to be, because we can't execute the killer app until we have the infrastructure in order to get there. Just a kind of interesting point from a killer app standpoint, I was, as I mentioned, I do business in Asia, and I had some customers from Japan last week, and they brought out as a gift to Elon some space sake. And so it was sake with some connection to space. I think the yeast was germinated on the space station, or some rice that had been grown on the space station. Small little market. Somebody's making money off that somewhere. It's not something that somebody would have thought of right off the bat. Celestis is doing their space burial. I think we don't know what's there until we've actually laid down the infrastructure and let the free market kind of do what they need to do. Very similar to what's happening with iPad apps and iPhone apps and stuff like that.
So let me go ahead.
Sorry, one more question that Rex brought up. I think the biggest enabler right now is something that SpaceX is trying to work on is reusability. And if we can get the launch cost way down. I mean, right now, SpaceX has low-cost launch, yeah. But once we prove out reusability, and somebody mentioned it yesterday, Mars missions, and Elon has said it, $500,000 a ride. These are kind of unprecedented numbers, and it's something that will be, I think, the killer app and the key enabler for everything and anything in space. So stay tuned for more reusability stuff from SpaceX.
So that was one of my questions that I wanted to ask specifically of you, John, and that was we've seen the pictures of the grasshopper on the pad there. Have you guys making any announcements about when that thing's going to fly?
No.
Darn. So let me go back to something you said, Rex, and that's and I'll open this up to the rest of them. You as well, is that how low is low enough? So where do you think the price of, whether you want to do TLI or lunar surface or something like that, how low does the price have to go before you really see the tipping point kind of thing there? So Rex, you brought this up. What kind of number do you have in mind there?
Of course, it depends on what kind of mission you're trying to do, but my notion is if you wanted to do any kind of, say, an impactor mission, I think we got to get to the point where you can do that whole mission, including launch costs, for low single-digit millions of dollars, $1 million or $2 million or $3 million. If you're trying to do something from lunar orbit, and the launch only costs you single-digit millions, I think you can do all kinds of great stuff with small satellites and even some medium-sized satellites. If you're trying to go to the surface, I think we're closer to 10 million or 20 million total cost. When we did I was on the Googles Lunar X Prize team called Southern California Selene Group. We had a very bright team. They had a custom design lander just to win the prize, nothing else, and we were on a Falcon 1E. I think we talked to you about that price. You quoted us the firm fixed price for the rocket, which was a Falcon 1E. We had a firm fixed price for the kick stage to get to the moon, go to the moon. The rest of it was all this custom design lander, and we were convinced when we had it all designed we could do that entire mission for about $20 or $25 million. And we were ready to go. I think a lot of the senior people on the team were working for no charge because they were retired and just wanted to have fun. But I think once you can get a simple lander with maybe some 5 or 10 or 10 kilograms of payload on it to the surface for 10 or 20 or 30 million, then there might be funding there to really start experimenting with some clever stuff. But most of the missions that have an end-to-end plan to land a rover and a lander and that kind of stuff right now, they're in the 50, 60, 80 million, $100 million range. I think it's just a non-starter for most of them. There's not that much money to do that.
Yeah, I was just about to mention the range of cost for the teams right now. They're looking at between typically $60 to $100 million. I think the intention is to try to get that down much lower probably in the $20 to $30 million range. That would be great, but they're just not at that point yet. Part of that is launch costs, part of that is development, and just making the technology itself cheaper. I think our biggest rover concept right now, which is Astrobotic, they're proposing 30 kilos on their rover, and it's at $2 million per kilo. And I know that there's intentions to bring that down much lower as well. So, it's going to start out expensive, but hopefully, in the next decade, that's going to come down significantly.
So let me go ahead and open this up to, we've got about 20 minutes left, so let me open this up to questions from the audience. So, yeah, do we have somebody with a mic? Yeah.
So the panel is called the Endgame of the GLXP. From previous prizes and competitions, we know that almost all of the people in this are going to fail, and then most of them are not even going to exist by the end of the prize. So just generally, what do you see as being like, the ones that don't make it, do you see anything else for them to do afterward? And then also just as a probably too clever by half, the discount on the Falcon 9 is worth about $3 million. So do you think anybody will leverage that in an exit to, not just go completely bust at the end of it?
Okay, well, for the first part of the question, I think no matter what the teams end up doing, all of the teams are contributing in some really great way to this overall lunar economy. Some of them are doing it in an educational way. Almost every single team is partnered with a university or a high school, at least one. Most teams are partnered with many. So they're really pushing the educational goals of this prize. And that was one of the three main goals when this prize was launched. First of all is education and inspiration of a global community about space exploration. Second of all is coming up with some new innovative technologies along the way. And then, of course, the third goal is to create this sustainable commercial lunar economy. And we're already seeing that come out of the teams. There's the educational things. There's also teams who are working to push space policy within their countries, and they're using Google Lunar X Prize as a platform for that. And then we're also seeing some of these spin-off technologies start up, and I'll use the example of Team Next Giant Leap, which was just acquired by Moon Express. They were one of our original teams, and the team leader of Next Giant Leap, he has left the competition, but he just started a new 3D printing company. And he told me last fall that he was thinking about doing this. He thought 3D printing was really interesting, and his ultimate goal is to perhaps find an application for this in the commercial lunar landscape, which maybe you can use lunar regolith in some way to do 3D printing in the future. It's kind of a far-reaching, a goal of, several years away, but he's getting started now. He came up with a new 3D printing technology, and he put it up on Kickstarter with a $50,000 goal, and I think he earned $500,000 almost. Over, yeah, it was a really inspirational and good example of things that are being spun off of this competition already. So that's just one example.
Yeah, my take on this is I think it's if a team finally wins the Google Lunar X Prize, it won't be by accident. It's because they had the savvy and all that to do it. And whatever architecture they used to do that with, the rocket, the kick stages, the lander, whatever they landed on the surface, if they win, that means it worked. And I think the most likely scenario to sustain that is just like what happened with the Ansari X-PRIZE. Scale Composites proved that architecture works to do that job, and so then someone like Branson came in, licensed the concept, scaled it up a bit, and now they have Virgin Galactic. And the original vehicle goes in the Smithsonian as a milestone of space, and the rest of it is kind of cloned as a bigger version, Big Brother version or whatever, and it's scaled appropriately for a more commercial model, and I think that's the most likely scenario. And I think the rest of the teams, unless they're somehow part of that equation with the winning team, I think most of them kind of fizzle out or do something else. But I think there's not a whole lot of room to keep going if you don't win the prize, unless you're really close to winning the prize.
Sure. A couple comments. one of the things is we can't be afraid of failure. I think we're all in this knowing that there's a high probability of failure. And we've said publicly that if we're going to fail, let's fail spectacularly. But people in this industry, when they fail, like Blastoff, for example, is a good example that Rex brought up. I wouldn't consider it a failure. It never took off the ground. But there's a lot of people, a number of people that were at Blastoff that are now running SpaceX. They'll have the bug, and there'll be another opportunity. And planetary resources, yeah. So not to be afraid of failure. And one of the greatest things about the successes, we have one or two successes you can have with like the Microsoft effect, where now you have additional people that are really interested in what's going on. SpaceX is very successful. There may be spin-offs, people with now fortunes made potentially, going off starting new things, and they're going to be looking for teams that have had experience. And so there's a lot of value in the people that have tried and failed. They say you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. So I wouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah, and I just add that Silicon Valley didn't shut down because of, the success rate is much less than the failure. And there are a number of companies right now who are contacting us, trying to build upon the bigger vision, and they have their own plans that this all dovetails with. The bottom line is we're demonstrating that the commercial sector has a viable role to play in the exploration and pioneering of new space frontiers, and the Google Lunar X Prize will go a long way to help at least open some of those doors and inspire other people to go into their garages and come up with new technologies, new ideas, and pioneer the future.
So Jim, let me ask you a question that I think a lot of people might have on their minds. Anybody that knows anything about Hawaiian politics knows that it can be pretty contentious, and yet you were able to develop this bipartisan support for this legislation when very few other things on the agenda were able to gather that kind of support. What was the key to success here? What was it about this whole idea that the legislators found compelling?
Well, the bottom line is the exploration of space is in our common genome. So whether you're a Republican or Democrat, House or Senate, administration or legislature, everybody eventually realizes the tremendous opportunities in science, education, commercial development that space exploration affords. We've been working the state legislature for a better part of 5 years now, explaining the opportunities for our state, for our nation, and ultimately the global space community. And they all eventually got it, if you will, and see the resources that it will make available with the enabling capabilities that this will bring to education in our state, but also partnerships between our state and the international community on several fronts. And it's not just aerospace. I mean, there are definitely connections between what we're working on in Pisces and the R&D park in the Big Island and broadband technologies, geothermal technologies, all integratable under this proposed research and development park. So it's sort of a rising tide that carries many boats. And that vision has really captured and inspired many of our legislators and has led us to a very successful conclusion in the last session.
Cool. We have some from the web here. So do the panelists think that there would be more or sooner attempts to win the prize if it was bigger? So I guess that's one of the controversies was the 20 million first prize and 30 million total prize purse. Is that big enough to kind of get this thing done? And so I have to say for myself, I've been pretty amazed, because I was one of the ones in that camp just saying, I don't think that's really enough money. But I have to say I've been pretty amazed at the amount of resources that's been able to leverage. But one of the, but I throw that out. Do you think that if there was more money that would get us there sooner?
I'll say a few words, I guess. Again, not necessarily. I think necessity breeds innovation, and the fact that the prize is what it is, people have come up with really creative ideas on how to get there within that budget. Rex talked about, okay, well, what would be a price that would actually make it more common in the $10 million range or whatever it was? So what if the money was less? Would we have less teams competing? I don't think so necessarily. But what's great about it, and for the first 2 years of X-Prize, people were off doing their own thing, and it wasn't until the third or fourth year where someone said, hey, let's collaborate. And maybe two teams join on one mission, or 3 or 4. So that previously, no one ever even thought of that. So we have to work within the budgets that we have. Money doesn't solve everything. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I would just take a cue from the business plan competition we just finished. The prize money went up from, what was it last year, 25?
25,000.
Went up to 110 total this year. Last year there were something like 20 or 25 submittals, and this year was 55. So I think you'll probably clearly get more participation if you just arbitrarily increase the prize money, but I don't necessarily think that translates into better proposals or anything, but you'll get more participation, more attention. You might even get a better team formed out of that incentive, but I'm not sure it's going to result in any faster schedule or anything.
But I think John's point is a good one, that sometimes having less money really forces you to be creative, where if you can do it the normal way, then is the prize really doing what it's intended to do, which is change the paradigm, change the kind of way that we do things. And so sometimes it's only that stress of not having a lot of money that really forces you out of the box and out of your comfort zone to look at new and novel ways.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I said about the Spaceship One versus Virgin Galactic example. Spaceship One, as it was built to win that prize, wasn't going to do a whole lot else for anybody else, really. And so, fortunately, the Branson and Virgin Galactic team realized that, and they realized they have to scale it up to really make it a commercially viable business. But having that constraint, really hard constraint on just winning the X Prize, fortunately, they designed a vehicle that could be scaled up in architecture. So I think that's the model that really works. And so for the Googles Lunar X Prize I was on, that vehicle could only win the prize and almost nothing else. But it's a scalable design, so now it's got some pretty interesting possibilities.
Any more questions from the audience? Yeah. Doug?
Just a question about the Falcon 9 launches. One, can you tell us how many teams have signed on that's known publicly? Second question is that your schedule in looking at it over the years keeps sliding ever to the right. And are you going to be able to launch those in time when they're ready to launch? And are you going to have conflicts between, say, commercial things going into GEO and things going to the moon?
Well, I can answer the first question. Only one team has publicly announced a launch contract, and that's Astrobotic, and they have signed the launch contract with SpaceX. There'll be more announcements coming soon. I can't say any more than that, but just keep your eyes open.
I guess the second half of your question was about schedule, right? So SpaceX is scaling as we speak right now. We have, as I mentioned, over 40 missions on our manifest out through 2017. But we're approaching the business like nobody else has ever approached it before. We're scaling. If you come to our factory today, we're scaling on par with the automotive kind of manufacturing techniques. We have a competent group of folks that are running a manifest control board. We have competent ERP management. We're transitioning from the 1.0 to the 1.1, and we're preparing for the demand. We know that before we had customers signed up, you were anticipating demand. We know what the demand is at this point because we have the customers signed up with firm contracts with money down. Now we've got to execute.
Yeah, over here and then to Brad. Oh.
Just a clarification, do you need the Merlin 1D to be able to do these lunar missions, and what schedule is that on?
The upgraded Merlin 1D, is it needed? First of all missions from here on out will have the Merlin 1D, so, and that will be our engine. So those will be the ones executing the missions.
This question is focused towards Jim. Is Hawaii putting in for their spaceport? I know it was going back and forth. And are the sites that you're looking at, do you plan any permanent site where you can continue testing year-round on various aerospace designs and ideals and rovers and in situ mechanisms?
You're talking about a commercial spaceport capability in the state. Yeah, we actually passed a bill back in 2009 to begin the environmental assessment studies required for a commercial spaceport license from the FAA. Unfortunately, due to a shortfall of revenues, we were not able to, or the governor was not able, former governor was not able to release those funds. However, in this last session, we passed Senate Bill 112, now Act 101, and it appropriates $250,000 for these studies for the environmental assessment. But it's only about half of what we need, and it mandates a 50-50 federal match, so we've applied to the FAA for a Space Transportation Infrastructure Management Grant, a STIM grant, and we should be hearing very shortly from the FAA on that, whether Hawaii has successfully bid. I'm going to bet that we have, and then we'll begin the environmental assessment studies probably by either September or October. We anticipate that'll take roughly 12 to 18 months to complete. Then we'll have a public review period. Then we'll officially apply for a commercial spaceport license from the FAA. Now that's for the horizontal launch and landing types craft, what we loosely call space planes. But we've also been exploring other launch capabilities. You know, at one point SpaceX was looking at possibility of launching from the east part of Hawaii, and we've had other companies talk to us about floating platforms going out of Kauai High Harbor. We were talking with the Sea Launch folks back in the mid-90s, actually, and we had a discussion about possibly basing that operation out of Middle Lock at Pearl Harbor. Then they got the sweetheart deal at Long Beach, and they were working with Hughes and others to. But you know, they launched from near Kiribati, and the sail from Long Beach is a hell of a lot longer than from Honolulu, Hawaii, and you can respond to environmental launch windows a lot faster from Honolulu than Long Beach. So we'll probably go back and revisit that possible scenario. But we're very serious about making Hawaii. It's an obvious node on the emerging spaceplane superhighway. And you know, initially it's going to be very competitive among locations and companies when you're talking about point back to the same point. But as soon as you breach to the point-to-point, and you can achieve some economies of scale, and these craft get bigger than just, you know, taking 1 to 5 people at the cost of maybe a third of a house, and when that cost comes down to a Mercedes D or something, you know, and you've got more time to develop that market to a real commercial space transportation market, I think you'll see Hawaii and other nodes around the world being part of that massive complex that will be a spaceplane superhighway, if you will, for commercial space transportation. And we're very optimistic that Hawaii will play a leading role in this.
And what about the permanency of a analog site, Moon Mars analog site? I know you said you only stay there temporarily. What time of year are you doing that? And do you also plan a permanent place for something like that?
We were not planning anything permanent for the test site per se on the slopes of Mauna Kea. We really respect the historical significance of that mountain, the cultural implications, and so forth. What we are building that's more of a permanent facility is a research and development park for aerospace with a core Pisces facility, and we're currently looking at various places to site that, either at the University of Hawaii at Hilo or Shipman Industrial Park or some other location on the Big Island, but one that is proximal to the Pauhakaloa and other areas on the Big Island which have the Moon Mars-like terrain for testing and evaluation. But we're trying to develop the sites that I mentioned earlier, chemistry labs, engineering labs, other permanent sites based in Hilo or near Hilo, where various companies can come in. The Pisces facility will serve as a magnet and will attract other companies to come in and test and evaluate the technologies that they're specifically trying to contribute to aerospace development, but leveraging the resources we have in Hawaii, especially the Moon Mars-like terrain. So permanent facilities would be in the Hilo area. The temporary facilities to actually do the testing and evaluation on the slopes of Mauna Kea will remain temporary. But in terms of the frequency, so far it's been once every 2 years, but that probably will ramp up in the near future.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
I think we got time for one more question. Brad?
Realizing that this number is actually a work in process or likely to change through time, do you have a current estimate of the multiplier effect for the Google Lunar X Prize? In other words, 30 million has been put up. And specifically what I'm looking for is cash versus in-kind. Is Google tracking this at all to see how much leverage they're actually getting for their money?
The answer is yes. We actually haven't, we're working on updating those numbers right now. We do it yearly in the summertime, and we collect that data from the teams on a regular basis. It was obviously tracked for Ansari, and we want to do the same thing with Google Lunar X Prize. I believe the last time that we finished up this study, it was about, I don't want to give wrong numbers. Approximately 5 times, I want to say, but I'll double check that and get back to you because I don't want to give out wrong numbers. But we're updating those again, so we'll actually have those released, and we'll put those out on our website probably in the next month or so.
Is that per team or
overall?
So let me ask one final closing question here is, at what date do you expect people to be back on the moon and, you know?
Somewhere between 2019 and 2022.
Amanda?
I hope by 2025 at the latest.
Yeah, I'm always more skeptical, so I'll say sometime around 2030. But I wish
We're
it was earlier.
linear progression here.
2040. $1, Bob. Yeah.
Depends on launch vehicle cost.
Exactly. And you said people as in humans, or
Yeah.
people as in a presence?
No, people as in humans, you know, human footprints on the moon again.
Sustainably.
Yeah.
U.S. citizens or other people?
Yeah, maybe 2020. As early as 2020.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, let me help me thank my panel, please.
In the program, it says that Gregory Schmidt is the moderator of this panel. Unfortunately, we got a call this morning. He said he was sick. So we have Bruce Prittman, the founder and president of Profit Engineering Technologies, who is currently a contractor with NASA and the director of flight projects, as his replacement moderator. And I'm sure you've already seen him on stage. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome up to introduce the rest of the panel. Bruce Prittman.
Yeah, Greg sends his regrets. He really wanted to be here. This is a topic that's near and dear to his heart, but he did not sound good. Called the ISECG. You know, in aerospace, we love these acronyms. The International Space Exploration Coordination Group. And it's a group of, I think it's 17 countries that get together and try to coordinate exploration strategies and how do we work together to explore space. And right now, they've got an interesting process that they're doing in that they have a dual path. So there's 2 kind of roadmaps that they've set up. One is that you go to the moon first and then you go to an asteroid, and then the other one is that you go to an asteroid first and then you go to the moon. So there's still a significant amount of controversy. There was recently a global exploration conference in Washington, and kind of like of the 17, it looked like a large majority of them, and I think Jim will talk to this, was really kind of focused on the moon for a number of reasons that we'll get into as part of this talk. And as you know, I don't think I have to explain to anybody in this room about the Google Lunar X Prize. But I'm sure Amanda's going to do that a little bit, is talk to us about that. And what we wanted to do here with this is not just do another, okay, here's what the Google Lunar X Prize is going to do and all that, but what we wanted to do was to focus on then what? So if somebody wins the Google Lunar X Prize, then what? You know, what does that enable? What kind of leverage does that give us? How could we leverage off of that capability to do things in the future? So we put together what I think is a a great group of folks here. So on the order that they're going to present, let me introduce Amanda Stiles is going to speak first, and she's the technical operations manager for the Google Lunar X Prize, and she's going to kind of lay the foundation for what we're going to do. Then we're going to have Jim Crisafulli. Jim is the director of the Office of Aerospace Development in the state of Hawaii, and there's some really exciting things going on in Hawaii as recently as last week. And are they still up there? They've left, but there's some stuff on Mauna Kea that
They resolved to leave.
They resolved to leave. Okay, that's a really bad pun, and he'll explain that to you. And then we've got Jonathan Hofsler from heads up the Far East business development for Space Exploration Technologies, affectionately known as SpaceX, is going to talk to us about kind of some of their thinking in this area. And then finally, Dennis Wingo is stuck in London, so he sends his regrets. He's not able to make it. You know, those darn transporters just aren't working the way that they're supposed to. And so I've asked Rex Ridenour here to step in for him. I've known Rex for like forever. You know, back when neither one of us had gray hair. I think we did the first one of these things, you know, like 33 years ago. We were kind of in the San Francisco area, you know, doing a conference like
U.S. Science, Technology, and Space Applications Program. And I see several people in the room here, Jim Caravala and Dallas and Charles Miller and others that have been participating in this for some time. International association that was largely bilateral. It's now expanded into the Pacific International Space Alliance to talk about how we might share common visions with complementary resources and capabilities to help reduce the costs, enhance the benefits, and hopefully accelerate the timetables of future space missions. So they started talking about, well, what are we going to do to extend humankind's presence beyond low Earth orbit? We haven't been there in 40 years. What is the next logical step? Then we had an exploratory workshop at Ames Research Center in April of last year, in which we refined this concept. And then last November in Hawaii, we had a leaders summit talking about the various components of launching a program like an ILRP, what the steps might be, and how we could prototype and test technologies, validate these technologies to support that kind of an operation. What's emerged over the past several years it's not really a new framework for space enterprise, but it's a way of looking at this as a two-sided coin. The first half century, we've been going out into space largely exploration and research. The Apollo program, Hayabusa, Spirit and Opportunity on the surface of Mars. And I only list these three destinations. We've obviously gone elsewhere, but these are the three destinations that have been discussed most recently on the Hill and elsewhere. But the next 50 years, the other side of this space enterprise coin, has to focus largely on space development and utilization, being able to move out into the cosmos, use those resources on other worlds so we can develop what Congress, the President, and others have called for, sustainable settlements beyond low Earth orbit. So we're talking manned and robotic missions to Moon, and we don't make a distinction between should we send robots or should we send humans. It's a partnership, and they have to work together. Robots and humans to asteroids and eventually to Mars. The future.
In 1979 for the 10th anniversary of the first lunar landing. So that shows you how far we go back. You know, is that the new thing? Eyes Up, IZUP LLC is his new thing. You probably know him as Mr. Ecliptic, which he founded and ran until very recently, and now he's got his new thing, and so he's for hire. So, you know, great guy, a lot of experience, small sats, planetary missions. But the reason that I asked him to join this panel is he's had a really fascinating experience with a group about a decade ago called Blastoff, which I thought was very appropriate to what we're talking about here. So again, the idea here is what happens after the Google Lunar X Prize. So let's start off with Amanda, and then we'll go in order from there. So then I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So Amanda.
Okay, is this thing on? Okay, good. So thank you, Bruce. My name is Amanda. I've been with the X-PRIZE Foundation now for about 3 years, and I've really seen the landscape of Google Lunar X Prize change in just that short amount of time. It's been really interesting. I think when I started, there was less than 20 teams, and a lot of them were just kind of still working on rovers that were on paper and mission concepts. And now we're seeing rovers that are in their third and fourth rover prototypes, and they're testing out at lunar analog sites that Jim will talk to you more about. And we're actually seeing a lot of teams negotiating and signing launch contracts, and not a lot of them have been announced yet, but we'll actually have one of those announced in the next 2 weeks. So those financial barriers that everyone's very concerned about are actually starting to come down brick by brick, and we think this is really going to happen. We just had our team summit in May. We're at 25 teams right now, and I would say the largest topic of discussion was teams talking about working together to make this happen. So a lot of teams have either worked on a rover or a lander, or they're looking at ways to collaborate to make the launch cost come down. There's not a single person in this competition that doesn't want the prize to succeed. So if it's not the team alone by themselves, they want to work with other teams, or they want to support this emerging lunar economy in some other way. So it's very inspiring to see that, and it's going to be a success. I can guarantee that. We hope to see multiple teams going in the next 2 to 3 years, and we're very excited and optimistic about that. And the teams who maybe won't make it to the moon are contributing in other ways that are significant, whether that be education or creating some spin-off industry that will support this lunar economy in the future. So I guess that's all I really have to say, but I will talk more about details later on.
Great. Jim?
Thank you, Bruce, and aloha. I'll try that again. Aloha. Aloha. There you go. That's the way we generally start all conferences in Hawaii, and it's lasted for some time, since the inception of the state in 1959. And as you know, Hawaii has played an instrumental role in supporting space exploration since its inception as a state, beginning with a test bed for the Apollo astronauts that went to the moon, and since then working very extensively with NASA and the private sector and commercial satellite launches and remote sensing of the Earth. And most recently, we've been toying with a concept called the International Lunar Research Park. And we've had another giant leap, but this time with all mankind. And this concept's been under formulation for some time, the past couple of years. It began with a conference in Hawaii with the Japan